Dr. Hannah sat in her grand office overlooking the crystal towers of the Galactic Research Center. Her blue skin sparkled under the artificial lights, and her large eyes reflected years of studying different alien species across the galaxy. She was proud of herself today. Very proud. Her newest research paper was making waves throughout the civilized worlds, and everyone was talking about it. The paper was called The Human Warrior: Why These Stories Are Just Make-Believe. In it, Hannah had spent months carefully explaining why all those crazy stories about human fighters were obviously fake. According to her research, humans were telling tall tales about their own kind to make themselves look tough and important. Think about it, she had written. Humans are small compared to most aliens. They live short lives, barely 100 years, while some species live for thousands. They don't have natural armor like the rock-hard Nexari people. They can't fly like the graceful Thylorians. They aren't 8 feet tall with massive muscles like the warrior Krillians. So how could they possibly be great fighters? The stories humans told were ridiculous, in her opinion. Tales of single human warriors defeating entire alien armies. Stories of humans winning battles when they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Legends of human soldiers fighting with nothing but simple metal weapons against enemies with advanced energy weapons, and still somehow winning. It was all nonsense, obviously. Hannah had interviewed hundreds of aliens from dozens of different worlds. Most agreed with her. Humans seem nice enough, a Thylorian diplomat had told her, but they're so fragile. I'm afraid I might break one if I shake hands too firmly. A Krillian general had laughed when she asked about human military capabilities. They mean well, but they're like children playing with toy soldiers. The Galactic Research Council had invited her to present her findings to the most important scientists and leaders in known space. When she stood at the podium that day, looking out at representatives from 50 different worlds, she felt like she was at the peak of her career. "Fellow beings," she had said, her voice carrying clearly through the massive auditorium. "We must stop treating human folklore as historical fact. These warrior stories are clearly the products of a young species trying to create an impressive mythology for themselves. It's quite common among primitive civilizations." The audience had nodded along as she presented slide after slide of evidence. Human bones were hollow and light compared to most aliens. Their reaction times were slow. Their natural weapons, teeth and fingernails, were laughably weak. They couldn't survive in most planetary environments without special equipment. They needed to eat constantly and sleep for 8 hours every day. The so-called human warrior is a myth, she had concluded to thunderous applause, a story they tell themselves to feel better about being the weakest species in the galaxy. We should treat these tales with the same seriousness we give to children's fairy stories. Her paper was published in every major scientific journal across the galaxy. Universities were adding it to their required reading lists. Military academies used it to teach cadets about the difference between legend and reality. Hannah's name was mentioned alongside the greatest researchers in galactic history. She had no idea how wrong she was about to discover she had been. The warning alarms started screaming at 3:47 in the morning, ship time. Hannah woke up in her comfortable research quarters aboard the luxury vessel Celestial Harmony, confused and groggy. The ship was shaking violently, and she could hear the distant sound of explosions coming from the engine room. Captain Vex, a tall, purple-skinned Thylorian with 4 arms, came over the intercom with panic in his voice. "All passengers, please prepare for emergency evacuation. Our hyperdrive has suffered a complete failure. We're dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Immediately." Hannah grabbed her research files and stumbled toward the emergency pods along with her team. There was Minho, her young Krillian research assistant who was always eager to please. Seo Jin, the brilliant Nexari data analyst with her rock-hard grey skin and glowing yellow eyes. And Ariam, a graceful Thylorian linguist who could speak 47 different alien languages. When they finally stopped shaking and the emergency was over, they found themselves floating in space near a tiny mining station. The thing looked like it had been built 50 years ago and forgotten about. Rust covered most of its metal surface, and only half the lights were working. A faded sign on the side read, "Mining Station Kepler 7, Asteroid Processing Facility. Well, this is just perfect, Seojin muttered, her rocky face showing clear annoyance. We're stuck in the middle of nowhere. The station's docking bay barely had room for their emergency shuttle. As they climbed out, Hana noticed how quiet everything was. Their footsteps echoed through empty corridors lined with pipes and old machinery. The air smelled like metal and recycled oxygen. Emergency lights cast weird shadows on the walls. "Hello?" Minho called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Is anyone here?" Eventually, they found the station's tiny control room where a few maintenance workers were keeping the place running. Most of them were aliens, a couple of insect-like Zephyrians who clicked and buzzed when they talked, and an elderly Nexari who looked like he'd been working on mining equipment for decades. But there was also a human. His name was Jiho, and he was exactly what Hana expected from her research. Middle-aged, maybe in his 40s, with brown hair that was starting to turn grey. His hands were rough and calloused from years of manual work. His clothes were the standard blue jumpsuit that maintenance workers wore on stations like this. He had the tired look of someone who'd been fixing the same broken machines for years. When Captain Vex introduced the stranded passengers, Jiho just nodded politely and went back to work on a control panel that was sparking and making concerning beeping sounds. He didn't seem impressed by their fancy titles or important research. He barely looked up when Hana mentioned she was a famous scientist. "How long until rescue ships arrive?" Ariam asked the station manager, a friendly Zephyrian named Click Buzz Whistle. "Hard to say," Click Buzz Whistle replied, his translator making his voice sound mechanical. "Our distress beacon has been broadcasting for 3 days, but we're pretty far from the main shipping lanes. Could be a week, could be longer." Hana watched Jiho working quietly in the corner, completely focused on repairing some kind of air filtration system. He moved with the slow, methodical patience of someone who'd been doing this job for a long time. Nothing flashy or impressive about him, just another ordinary human doing ordinary work in an ordinary way. "See," she thought, to herself. "This is exactly what I wrote about. Humans are just normal, regular, nothing special." She had no idea that in a few hours, this quiet maintenance worker would completely destroy everything she thought she knew about his species. The first sign of trouble was when all the lights on the station suddenly dimmed to emergency power. Hana was in the small cafeteria, trying to choke down something that barely qualified as food, when the entire structure started vibrating like a drum. "What's happening?" Minho asked, his large Krillian frame tensing up with worry. Before anyone could answer, the station's ancient warning system came to life with a sound like grinding metal. A robotic voice echoed through the corridors. "Alert! Alert! Multiple! Unidentified vessels approaching. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately." Through the small porthole windows, Hana could see them coming. Black ships shaped like angry insects, emerging from the darkness of space like something out of a nightmare. They moved in perfect formation, surrounding the tiny mining station from all sides. Even from a distance, she could see the weapon ports glowing with deadly energy. "Oh no," whispered Ariam, her usually graceful Thylorian features twisted with fear. "Those are Shadowclaw raiders. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Shadowclaw raiders. They were the worst kind of pirates, the ones who didn't just steal cargo and leave. They destroyed everything they touched. Entire colonies had been wiped off the map when the Shadowclaws decided to visit. They took what they wanted and killed everyone who saw them do it." The station manager, Click Buzz Whistle, was frantically pressing buttons on his control panel. "This is Mining Station Kepler 7 requesting immediate assistance," he broadcast on all emergency frequencies. "We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Please, anyone who receives this message, we need help." But they all knew the truth. They were too far from civilization. No rescue ships would arrive in time. They were alone. Captain Vex, who had seemed so confident and in control during their emergency landing, was now shaking like a leaf. His 4 purple arms were wrapped around himself as he stared out at the approaching ships. "We're all going to die," he kept muttering. "We're all going to die." Seojin, despite her rock-hard Nexari exterior, was backing against the wall with her glowing eyes wide with terror. Maybe they just want the mining equipment, she said, though her voice suggested she didn't believe it herself. Maybe they'll take what they want and leave us alone. Hana felt her own heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. All her academic training, all her years of studying different species and their behaviors, hadn't prepared her for this moment. She was just as scared as everyone else. That's when she noticed something strange. While everyone else was panicking, running around, or frozen with fear, Jiho was moving with purpose. The tired, ordinary maintenance worker she'd barely paid attention to was walking calmly through the chaos, checking systems and gathering equipment. His whole body language had changed. The slouched shoulders were straight now. The tired eyes were sharp and focused. He moved to a supply closet and started pulling out tools, but not the kind you'd use to fix a broken pipe. Heavy cutting torches, industrial chemicals, pieces of metal that could be turned into weapons. His hands moved quickly and efficiently, like he'd done this before. "Everyone needs to get to the central hub," Jiho said, his voice cutting through the panic. It wasn't loud, but something about the way he spoke made everyone stop and listen. "Lock the doors. Stay away from the windows. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What are you going to do?" Hana asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Jiho looked at her, and for just a moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. It wasn't fear or panic, like everyone else. It was something much more dangerous. It was the look of someone who was getting ready to hunt. Hana followed Jiho to the maintenance bay, unable to look away from what was happening. This wasn't the same person she'd dismissed just hours earlier. Every movement he made was deliberate and purposeful. He wasn't panicking or running around like everyone else. Instead, he was thinking, planning, preparing. The maintenance bay was filled with industrial equipment used to keep the mining station running. Jiho moved through it like he was shopping for groceries, calmly selecting items and testing them. He picked up a plasma cutter, the kind used to slice through metal pipes, and checked its power level. The blue flame that shot out was hot enough to cut through steel like butter. "That's not going to work against their armor," Seojin said, watching him with her glowing yellow eyes. "Shadow Claw raiders wear military-grade protective suits. Those tools are made for cutting metal, not fighting soldiers." Jiho didn't answer. He just moved to a cabinet and started pulling out chemical containers, cleaning solvents, industrial acids, pressurized gas canisters, things that seemed completely harmless when used for their intended purpose, but in the right hands. "What are you doing?" Minho asked, his voice shaking. The young Krillian was trying to be brave, but his 8-foot frame was trembling. "Improvising," Jiho said simply. He was mixing chemicals in a way that made Hana's scientific mind scream. Warnings. Those combinations weren't supposed to go together. They could explode, they could create toxic gases. That was exactly the point. Captain Vex stumbled into the maintenance bay, his 4 purple arms flailing wildly. "They're cutting through the hull," he shouted. "The boarding parties will be inside in minutes. We need to hide. We need to run." "No," Jiho said, his voice calm but firm. But you need to get to the central hub and lock yourselves in, all of you, right now." "But what about you?" Aryam asked. "You can't fight them alone. There are dozens of them, and they're trained killers." For the first time since the attack began, Jiho stopped what he was doing and looked directly at her. His tired eyes had changed completely. They were cold now, calculating like he was looking at a chessboard and thinking 10 moves ahead. "I'm not going to fight them," he said quietly. "I'm going to hunt them." The way he said it made Hana's skin crawl. This wasn't bravado or false confidence. This was a statement of fact delivered by someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. The sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the station. The raiders were inside. "Go," Jiho said, strapping tools to his belt and shouldering a bag. "Serve improvised weapons. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except me. If I don't come back in 2 hours, try to signal for help." "Wait," Hana said, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "In my research, I proved that human warriors were just myths, stories, make-believe. How can you possibly—" Jiho looked at her with something that might have been sad amusement. "Doctor, your research was about the wrong kind of warrior. You studied soldiers and generals and heroes from old stories. You never studied the maintenance workers and miners and farmers who just wanted to be left alone. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The raiders were spreading out, searching, the station room by room. The thing about humans, Jiho continued, checking the charge on his plasma cutter one more time, is that we don't fight because we want to. We fight because we have to. And when we have to... He paused, listening to the sounds of the approaching enemy. Well, you're about to find out what that looks like. He disappeared into the dark corridors like a ghost, leaving behind only the faint smell of industrial chemicals and the terrifying certainty that everything Hana thought she knew about humans was completely wrong. Hana and the others huddled in the central hub, watching the security monitors with growing disbelief. The screens showed different areas of the mining station, and what they were seeing shouldn't have been possible. The Shadowclaw raiders had spread throughout the station in perfect military formation. These weren't common thieves or desperate pirates. They were professional soldiers wearing advanced combat armor that could stop energy weapons. Each one carried guns that could punch through solid steel. They moved like a well-oiled machine, communicating through helmet radios and covering each other's movements. There were 12 of them. 12 trained killers against one human maintenance worker. It should have been over in minutes. Raider Team Alpha report, came a voice through their intercepted communications. The station's old systems could pick up their radio chatter, and Click Buzz Whistle had patched it through the speakers. Alpha 3 here. Sector 7 is clear. No sign of resistance. Alpha 7 checking in. Found some scared civilians in the cafeteria. Low weapons, proceeding to next zone. For the first few minutes, everything went exactly as expected. The raiders moved through the station like they owned it, confident and professional. Then something started going wrong. Alpha 5, come in. The commander's voice crackled through the radio. Alpha 5, respond. Silence. On the security monitor, they could see Alpha 5's last known position, a maintenance tunnel near the power core. His armor was there, but it was empty. Somehow, impossibly, the raider inside had simply vanished. What happened to his body? Seojin whispered, her rocky face pale with confusion. Probably dragged away, Minho said, though he didn't sound convinced. Alpha 2 and Alpha 6 investigate Alpha 5's position, the commander ordered. They watched. The two raiders approached the tunnel carefully, weapons ready. The first one stepped inside, his armor's lights cutting through the darkness. Then the lights went out. Both raiders started screaming through their radios, not words, just pure terror, and then silence again. This is impossible, Captain. Vex muttered. How is one person doing this? Hana was starting to understand. Jiho wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like someone who knew every pipe, every wire, every hidden passage in the station. He'd probably been working here for years, crawling through maintenance tunnels and repair shafts that the raiders didn't even know existed. Alpha 4, Alpha 8, Alpha 9, stick together. The commander's voice was getting nervous now. Something's picking us off. Watch the shadows. But watching didn't help. They saw Alpha 4 disappear when a section of ceiling collapsed on him, except the ceiling had been rigged to fall. They watched Alpha 8 get caught in an explosion of sparks and flame when a power coupling overloaded. Except power couplings don't just overload by themselves. He's using the station against them, Hana realized out loud. He's turning their own environment into a weapon. The breaking point came when the three remaining raiders, Alpha 1, Alpha 7, and Alpha 11, finally cornered Jiho in the main corridor. They had him trapped with nowhere to run, their weapons trained on him from 3 different angles. Finally, Alpha 1 said through his radio, target acquired, prepare to... That's when Jiho did something that made no sense at all. Instead of surrendering or trying to hide, he started walking toward them. Not running, walking, steady, deliberate steps like he was taking a casual stroll. In his hands was just a modified plasma torch, the kind used to weld pipes together. Stand. Down, Alpha 1 shouted. Stop moving or we'll fire. Jiho didn't stop. Instead, he opened his mouth and let out a sound that made every alien in the central hub step backward, in instinctive fear. It wasn't a scream or a shout. It was something primal and ancient, like the howl of a predator that had been hunting. Long before civilization existed, the 3 raiders froze. Their weapons were still pointed at him, but something about that sound had paralyzed them with confusion and terror. In that moment of hesitation, Jiho moved. What happened next was too fast for the security cameras to capture clearly, but when the smoke cleared, all 3 raiders were down, and Jiho was standing alone in the corridor, breathing heavily, but very much alive. "Impossible," Seojin whispered. But Hana was beginning to realize that when it came to humans, maybe impossible was just another word for misunderstood. The silence after the battle was almost worse than the fighting itself. Jiho emerged from the corridors covered in soot and minor cuts, carrying a wounded Zephyrian maintenance worker who had been caught in the crossfire. His movements were gentle now, careful, like he was handling something precious and fragile. "Medical supplies are in storage bay 3, he said quietly to Ariam, who was the closest thing they had to a medic. "The Zephyrian has a broken wing membrane, should heal fine with the right treatment." Hana watched in stunned silence as this same person, who had just single-handedly eliminated 12 trained killers, carefully bandaged wounds and checked everyone for injuries. His hands, which had been instruments of destruction just minutes earlier, were now steady and precise as they applied medical gel to cuts and scrapes. It was like watching 2 completely different people occupying the same body. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. What just happened out there?" Jiho looked up from where he was checking Minho's pulse. The young Krillian had fainted during the battle and was just now coming around. Those tired eyes studied Hana for a long moment, like he was trying to decide how much truth she could handle. "You want the scientific explanation?" he asked, sitting back on his heels. "Or do you want the real one?" "Both," Hana said immediately. Her academic mind was desperate for answers, even if those answers destroyed everything she'd believed. About his species, Jiho nodded slowly. "Scientifically speaking, humans evolved as persistence hunters. We didn't outrun our prey or overpower it. We just kept going. When a mammoth got tired, we were still there. When it tried to hide, we found it. When it fought back, we adapted. We never stopped. We never gave up. That's what millions of years of evolution built into our DNA." He stood up and rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms covered in scars. Not neat, surgical scars from medical procedures, but rough, ugly marks that told stories of violence and survival. This one, he pointed to a jagged line across his forearm, was from defending a farming colony on Kepler 9. Pirates thought they could take whatever they wanted. Turned out they were wrong. Another scar, this one on his shoulder. Asteroid mining accident, explosion trapped 47 workers underground. Spent 3 days digging them out with my bare hands when the equipment failed. A burn mark on his deck. Rescue mission on a damaged space station. Life support was failing. Someone had to go into the reactor core to fix it manually. The radiation should have killed me, but he shrugged. Sometimes humans just refuse to die when other people need us alive. "But you're just one person," Seojin said, her rocky features twisted with confusion. 12 trained soldiers with advanced weapons. The math doesn't work." "That's where you're wrong," Jiho said, sitting down heavily on a supply crate. For the first time since the attack began, he looked truly tired. "You're thinking about it like a fair fight, like some kind of sporting event with rules and referees." He gestured toward the dark corridors where the battle had taken place. "Those raiders came here expecting to fight scared civilians, and maybe some basic security guards. They had better weapons, better armor, better training. On paper, they should have won easily." "So what changed?" Hana asked. "They made one mistake," Jiho said, his voice getting quiet and dangerous again. "They threatened people I was responsible for protecting. When that happens, humans don't fight fair. We don't follow the rules. We don't care about odds or proper tactics or what's supposed to be possible." He looked directly at Hana, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why the raiders had frozen in terror. "We become something else, something that doesn't know how to quit, doesn't understand the word impossible, and absolutely will not stop until the threat is eliminated or we're dead. Usually the threat gets eliminated first." The simple matter-of-fact way he said it was somehow more terrifying than any battle cry or dramatic speech could have been. "Your research," Jiho continued, "studied the wrong kind of human. You looked at our legends and our heroes and our grand historical battles, but the most dangerous humans aren't the ones looking for a fight. They're the ones who just want to be left alone to do their jobs and protect the people they care about. Hannah realized her hands were shaking. Everything she'd built her career on was crumbling around her, and she wasn't sure if she was terrified or fascinated by what was replacing it. 3 days later, the rescue ships finally arrived. Hannah stood at the observation deck, watching the sleek vessels dock with the mining station, her mind churning with thoughts that kept her awake at night. The Galactic Rescue Service had sent their best ships, fast cruisers with medical bays, and comfortable passenger quarters that would take them back to civilization. But going back to civilization meant going back to her old life, her reputation, her career. Her carefully constructed academic world, where humans were weak and their warrior stories were just fairy tales. "Dr. Hannah?" Minho approached her cautiously. The young Krillian had been quiet since the attack, still processing what he'd witnessed. "The rescue captain wants to debrief us about what happened here. What should we tell them?" It was the question that had been haunting her for 3 days. What should they tell them? Seojin and Ariam joined them at the observation deck, both looking as confused and shaken as Hannah felt. These were brilliant minds, some of the best researchers in their respective fields. They'd seen the same impossible events she had. They'd watched one human maintenance worker do things that violated everything they understood about combat, physics, and the limits of biological capability. "We could say it was a malfunction in the security systems," Seojin suggested quietly. "That the recordings were corrupted, that we were too scared to see clearly what really happened. Or we could claim Jiho had hidden military training," Ariam added. "That he wasn't really just a maintenance worker, that he was some kind of undercover special forces operative." Hannah knew they were offering her a way out. Her research assistants understood what was at stake. If they reported what they'd actually witnessed, it would destroy more than just Hannah's career. It would force the entire galaxy to reconsider everything. They thought they knew about humans. "The problem is," Hannah said slowly, "other people saw it too. Click-Buzz Whistle was monitoring the security feeds. The other maintenance workers witnessed parts of it. Captain Vex's ship has sensor recordings of the whole attack." "We could ask them to keep quiet," Minho suggested. "Explain that it might cause panic if people knew how dangerous humans could be." Hannah almost laughed at the irony. A few days ago, she would have been insulted by the idea that anyone could consider humans dangerous. Now she was contemplating covering up evidence, because it was too dangerous for people to know the truth. Her portable computer sat on a nearby table, containing her half-finished report about the incident. She'd started writing it a dozen times, and stopped each time. "How do you explain that everything you've built your career on is wrong? How do you tell the galaxy's most respected academic institutions that their leading expert on human psychology had completely misunderstood the species she was studying?" "There's another problem," Ariam said, her graceful Thylorian features troubled. "If we don't report this accurately, and something like this happens again somewhere else, people won't be prepared. They'll underestimate humans the same way those raiders did." That was the crux of it. The Shadowclaw raiders had attacked the mining station because they thought it would be easy prey. A few maintenance workers and some stranded academics, nothing that could fight back effectively. They'd been completely wrong, and that mistake had cost them their lives. But how many other groups out there were making the same assumption? How many pirates, criminals, or hostile forces looked at human settlements and saw easy targets because of research like hers? "We have a responsibility," Seojin said, her rocky Nexari features set with determination, "as scientists, as researchers, to report the truth no matter how uncomfortable it makes us." Hannah picked up her computer and stared at the blank document on the screen. She could write a simple report that stuck to the basic facts and downplayed the impossible parts. She could protect her reputation and continue her comfortable academic life, or she could tell the truth and watch everything she'd worked for crumble. "Dr. Hannah," Minho said gently, "what do you think Jiho would want us to do?" She thought about the quiet human who had saved all their lives. He hadn't asked for recognition or glory. He hadn't even seemed particularly proud of what he'd accomplished. He'd just done what needed to be done and gone back to fixing broken equipment. But he'd also trusted them with the truth about what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. Hannah took a deep breath and started typing. 6 months after. The incident at mining station Kepler-7, Hannah's new research paper, hit the galactic academic network like a bomb going off. Within hours of publication, her personal communicator was buzzing non-stop with messages from colleagues, reporters, and military officials across dozens of star systems. The human paradox. Why the galaxy's most peaceful species creates its most terrifying warriors was nothing like her previous work. Gone were the careful dismissals and logical explanations for why human combat stories were exaggerated. Instead, she presented hard evidence, witness testimonies, and security footage that painted a completely different picture of humanity. The response was immediate and explosive. "Dr. Hannah has lost her mind," declared Professor Zekthul of the Thylaurian Science Academy during a televised debate. One isolated incident involving a possibly mentally unstable human does not overturn decades of established research. She's building an entire theory on a single data point. But other voices were starting to speak up. Military officers who had served alongside humans in peacekeeping missions began sharing their own stories, tales that had been dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstandings suddenly took on new significance. Commander Veltash of the Nexari Defense Force published a response that sent ripples through military circles. "I have personally witnessed human soldiers accomplish tactical objectives that our computer simulations rated as having 0% chance of success. We assumed our calculations were wrong. Perhaps we should have been questioning our assumptions about human capabilities instead." The most dramatic change came from the Krillian War Academy, the galaxy's most prestigious military training institution. For generations, they had taught that humans were useful as support personnel and engineers, but should never be placed in frontline combat roles due to their physical limitations. General Thokmar, the Academy's commandant, quietly ordered his staff to obtain copies of every human legend they could find. Stories that had been filed away as primitive mythology were suddenly being analyzed by the galaxy's top military strategists. What they discovered was disturbing. The Battle of Thermopylae, where a small group of human warriors held off a massive army despite being completely outnumbered. The Warsaw Uprising, where ordinary civilians fought against overwhelming military force. D-Day, where humans launched one of the largest military operations in their history against fortified positions. "These aren't myths," General Thokmar told his staff during a classified briefing. "These are tactical manuals. Humans have been documenting their combat innovations for thousands of years, and we've been ignoring them because we thought they were fairy tales." Defense contractors began reaching out to human settlements, offering lucrative contracts for consultation on asymmetric warfare tactics and resource-limited combat scenarios. The same species that had been dismissed as technologically primitive was suddenly being courted for their expertise in winning impossible battles. The political implications were even more significant. Several galactic powers that had been planning to expand into human-controlled space quietly cancelled their expansion plans. The hegemony of Veltar, which had been considering annexing several human mining colonies, suddenly decided that diplomatic negotiations would be more appropriate. Pirates and raiders throughout the galaxy began receiving updated intelligence briefings about human settlements. The phrase "avoid at all costs" started appearing next to previously tempting targets, but perhaps the most important change was happening in ordinary conversations across the galaxy. When species that had never encountered humans before asked about them, the answers were different now. Humans? "Oh, they're nice enough," a Thylaurian trader might say. "Very friendly, great engineers, love to share stories about their homeworld. Just don't threaten anyone they care about. Trust me on that one." Hannah found herself at the center of an academic revolution she had never intended to start. Universities were updating their xenobiology textbooks. Diplomatic corps were revising their first contact protocols. Military academies were adding new courses on human tactical psychology. Her personal communicator chimed with yet another interview request, this one from the Galactic Defense Council. They wanted her to advise on new policies for dealing with human populations in contested regions. She thought about Jiho, probably still fixing broken equipment on some remote station, completely unaware that his actions had fundamentally changed. How an entire galaxy viewed his species. He had just been doing his job, protecting people who needed protection. But in doing that job, he had rewritten everything the galaxy thought it knew about what humans were capable of when pushed beyond their limits. The age of underestimating humanity was over. The question now was what would replace it. 2 years after the mining station Kepler-7 incident, Jiho was back to doing what he'd always done, fixing things that were broken. His new assignment was Frontier Station Omega-12, an even more remote outpost than the last one. It sat on the edge of unexplored space, serving as a refueling stop for deep space explorers and survey teams. The work was exactly the same. Broken air recyclers, faulty gravity generators, temperamental communication arrays. Jiho moved through the station's maintenance tunnels with the same quiet efficiency he'd always had, carrying his toolbox and keeping the lights on for everyone who lived and worked there. Most of the station's residents had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another human maintenance worker, polite, competent, and completely unremarkable. They didn't know that his name had been mentioned in classified military briefings across half the galaxy. They didn't know that pirate captains now carried wanted posters with his face on them, marked "Do Not Engage." Jiho preferred it that way. One evening, while he was repairing a malfunctioning food synthesizer in the station's cafeteria, his personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. The sender was Dr. Hana Velthirian, a name he hadn't seen in 2 years. The message was short. "My new research has been published. Thank you for showing me what I had gotten wrong. I hope you're doing well." Jiho smiled and typed back an even shorter response. "Thanks for getting the story right. Most folks don't bother asking why we fight." He didn't mention that her research had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed his entire species. He didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere, even out here on the frontier. Last month, a Shadowclaw raider ship had approached the system, probably planning to attack the station like they'd done at Kepler-7. But when their sensors detected human life signs among the crew, they'd changed course and left without a word. Word was spreading through the criminal underworld. Human settlements were no longer easy targets. 3 weeks ago, a distress call had come from a passenger liner that had suffered engine failure near a hostile system. When the rescue coordinator asked who was available to attempt a dangerous retrieval mission, 6 alien captains had immediately said the same thing. "Do we have any humans available?" And just yesterday, Jiho had overheard a conversation in the station's bar that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. A Nexari trader was telling a Thylorian diplomat about a colony ship that had been attacked by raiders in the Vega system. It looked hopeless, the Nexari had said, shaking his rocky head. 50 raiders against 20 colonists, mostly families with children, but there were 3 humans on that ship. 3. By the time the Galactic Defense Force arrived, the raiders were either dead or running for their lives. "How is that possible?" the Thylorian had asked. "I don't know," the Nexari had replied, "but I've heard stories like this from across the galaxy. When humans have something to protect, they become different, dangerous. I've started investing in human colonies because I know nobody's going to mess with them." Jiho had continued his work, pretending not to listen, but the conversation had stayed with him. The galaxy was learning what he'd always known. Humans weren't warriors because they loved fighting. They were warriors because they loved protecting. His communicator chimed again. This time it was a message from the station commander asking if he'd be willing to train the security staff in unconventional defense tactics. Apparently, word of his background had reached even this remote outpost. Jiho deleted the message without responding. He wasn't a teacher or a trainer. He was a maintenance worker who just wanted to keep the station running and the people on it safe. But as he worked late into the station's artificial night, fixing systems and solving problems that nobody else could handle, he was aware of something. That would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Across the galaxy, in the deepest reaches of space where danger lurked and hope seemed lost, other species had begun whispering a new kind of prayer when disaster struck. "Send us a human." Not because humans were the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced, but because when everything seemed impossible, when rational beings would give up and accept defeat, humans would look at the situation and ask a different question. Who needs protecting? And then they would find a way to protect them no matter what the odds. The myth of the human warrior had never been a myth at all. It was a promise. And Jiho was living proof that promises, once made, would always be kept.